Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Innovation Conversation. Today we're joined again by Alexander Piskunov for our second show, I guess. And we kind of wanted to invite Alexander. Alexander, thank you so much for joining us again. Me and Harry still feel there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So because you are the first investor we have on the show, we kind of want to go through the basics of how to actually get investment, not necessarily from you, but from investors all over the world. So we kind of wanted to do on this episode is to ask you about the literally the basics, like how to build a nice business plan, how to build a pitch deck, because there's a lot of information out there, and for the first time entrepreneur, it's actually quite hard to get started. So let's get started with the basics. Pitch deck. How do you build a pitch deck, and how to get started?
Okay, Ricardo Harry, thanks for inviting me for the second time. Glad to be here. So, to jump into your question, well, honestly, I would not say that there is an ideal way to build a pitch deck, right? It depends on many things, namely the geography in which you, as a startup, are fundraising, because in certain geographies, like, for example, in Silicon Valley, your ability to commercialize would be available much more than if you were fundraising in a bunch of emerging markets, like, for example, in South Korea or in Russia or in Latin America, where it's much more important for entrepreneurs normally to distinguish themselves even at an early stage by displaying greater ability for delivering the innovative technological edge, right?
Mhm.
Or another meaningful differentiation point could be depending on the stage at which your startup is in, because obviously, at an earlier stage there are not as many financial results to speak of. So normally, when you are fundraising, you would focus on your vision of future growth as an entrepreneur,
Mhm.
your existing traction, the technological advantage brought by your product, um, and similar things. While at the later stages, so in the VC terminology, maybe at Series A or Series B, then you can focus on the unit economics, right? So when there are not as many financial metrics to speak of yet,
Mhm.
but you had some sales, you had some investors, and you can try and project them into the future with some degree of certainty. And then at the later stages, so by Series B and beyond, then you can actually review your financial statements. You can make predictions which are more likely to be accurate. You can talk about a great volume of your clients, and how long have they been using your product, what is their feedback, and things like that, which is obviously not possible when you're just an early stage company. But then again, there are distinctions even at the later stages, because, for example, if you're a deep tech company, then the likelihood is only by Series B, or sometimes even beyond, have you actually managed to secure enough financing to properly go through all the R&D that you need to get done to obtain the necessary patents to actually begin the very early sales? While if you look at, for example, the fintech platforms, or I don't know, ride sharing or micromobility or marketplaces, and by Series B, they are more likely to be very, very big companies. So, taking all of it aside, I would say that definitely, even though there is no ideal ways to build a pitch deck, it's
Mhm.
very, very important for you as an entrepreneur to avoid uh, all the technical jargon that there could be, because the likelihood is, the person who is sitting on the other side of you in the negotiation, he might not be a specialist investor. And if you are scaring away with the jargon, then he might not be willing to invest, sure, but he might not even understand what kind of other potential interested party he can refer you to. So you're basically shooting yourself in the leg by trying to be as sophisticated as possible. And believe me, there will be a time in the negotiations or in due diligence where if you have a significant technological edge, you would be asked to show it and to prove it. So there will be a time, and don't worry about it during the pitch deck development process.
Mhm.
Other than that, I would say, on average, less is better in terms of the amount of slides or amount of information that you want to put, because the whole purpose of a pitch deck basically is to answer the very, very low hanging questions that the investor might have, so that he is reasonably certain that he wants to have a face to face meeting with you where the majority of the more sophisticated questions, once again, coming to the technological side, would probably be asked, right?
So what would be some of the
But
low-hanging fruits? So I know
okay,
yeah, because then that'd be quite an interesting one. Because again, it's as our audience is predominantly startups, very very early stages. It's about how do you get into the mindset of the investors? It's just do the investors just want to see money, growth projections? What's their valuation? Is that kind of what they're looking at, or is there a little bit more to it?
well, partly that as well, Harry, but not just that, right? So obviously, it is very important to show how much you are aiming to fundraise, what would that money go towards, at least in your own forecasts, and maybe what kind of things would you be looking for from investors other than that money, because if you are fundraising in a very competitive market, then the likelihood is there is quite a bit of money potentially available. So for you as an entrepreneur, if you are sophisticated enough, you would probably be able to fundraise from the investors who are able to provide you with the smart money, right? So maybe they would be offering you access to investors at the later stages, or maybe it's help to do with product development or entry into new markets, or hiring of C-level members and things like that. And if you are showcasing it in your deck, then the investor would understand that you actually know your own limitations, and you know what kind of things do you need in order to bring a vision into fruition. So that would actually be quite a good point to get across during the pitch deck development. But other than that, I would say that there are still many other things that you need to consider. For example, it's very important for you to showcase what kind of problems already exist on the market in which you are trying to build your new product or service into, right? So what kind of solutions there are, why are they inefficient? So maybe they're too expensive, maybe they take too long to deliver, maybe they're great but they are aimed at a slightly different demographic or a geographical market, and as a result you have an opportunity to find your own niche within the bigger market. And obviously then you can go on talking in more detail about your own product, right? So speaking about what kind of features does it have, what is a USP, so the unique selling point, what would be the technological edge, maybe if you already have a demo of that product, or some screenshots, it will be a good opportunity to share them, so that there is an opportunity to see it from the inside as well, or and then talk more about the market, right? So the usual case for entrepreneurs that I've seen to be successful is to talk about the market twofold. So first of all, focus on the market within a single geographical region. Let's say, for example, the UK or the States or Singapore, and then talk about the market in global terms, right? So by focusing on one market, you will be able to show the investor that the exact locale from which you are starting. But then the global market is also huge and it's growing, and there is potential for you to expand overseas as well. And when you're talking about the market, it's also very important to not just list the statistics, but also to explain, why exactly would the market be growing at the rate that it will, and similar things, right? And when you are listing the statistics, it's obviously also quite important to showcase the resources from which you have obtained the data from, right? So maybe it is a report by a consulting firm, maybe it's research that has been done by the government or similar sources. And even though nobody might even have a look at it, it's still important to have access to it and to showcase it just in case, some questions might get asked. Other than that, obviously, it's also very, very important to showcase how exactly are you different from your competition, right? And while, for example, when you're talking about, the market and its current pain points, you are describing your competition very generally. But it's also important, to be more specific. So perhaps, even dedicate a different slide to it. So talk about, the pricing policies, the differences in consumer markets, the differences in fundraised amounts, if they are, another startup, and similar things. So basically talk about, 4 or 5 of your major competitors and try and compare by 4 or 5 major bullet points. So don't go into too much detail. And I mean, look, there are many other things that you can talk about, but just, to save time, would love to hear more questions. Sure.
I'm curious to know how long do you think a pitch deck should be? Because there's multiple, if you go online, everyone says anything from 11 pages to 30 pages. So what do you think is like the perfect size? And yeah.
Well, look, 30 pages I think is a too long period, right? Because normally the investor, even if he's very interested, his attention span that does not last that long, right? So it's very important to be concise. And as I mentioned to you before, less is more. So I would advise, sticking to 15 or 18 pages at the maximum, right? And while some entrepreneurs, they like to put appendices onto their decks, I would say in general, just leave them out, because once again, the appendices tend to contain the information which is, maybe more technical in its nature or more in-depth in terms of, what the average pitch deck would allow. And once again, if the investor is already interested, there will be more opportunities for you to engage with him to share that information. So just don't overload with information from the very start. So I think that, it's important to have a 15 to 18 page deck. Also, it is usually very helpful to have a one page, right, where you would display all the major selling points of your startup, whether, it's a stellar founding team or very, very innovative product or great traction, even if you're an early stage company or, huge market and, similar things. And then you would compile all of that information onto one slide, and you can use it, to even send this information to investors whom you are pretty sure would not be interested, but they might be helpful when it comes to potentially, passing this to somebody else who might be more interested in terms of investing. And usually into one pages because they are not as well, because one pages they are spread out much broader. Usually they don't contain any proprietary information, right? So do try and keep them clean without asking potential investors to sign NDAs, because it's very difficult sometimes to keep things confidential.
I just want to ask, what's the best format to put all this information in? Because you mentioned about the attention spans of investors. Obviously, showcasing little is always the best because it's all about telling a story. Do you often get individuals sending over video pitches or intro pitches? Is that something that grabs more of your attention, or do you find that more as just time wasting? Like, what would you recommend? Is it just normal traditional PDF or PowerPoint presentation, or an actual video? What do you think works for combining both?
Well, good question. I think that, at least from our end, I would say that we received only a couple of video pitches, and I would not say that, any of those have received investment from us. Let's just say that,
No,
right? So
no.
I think it's good to be, creative, but to a certain extent, right? So there are industry acceptable formats for a reason. And I think that a PowerPoint presentation is just so much more helpful because you can present, once again, the statistics, you can present your vision, you can talk about your traction. in much more comprehensive format than a video pitch would have allowed you to. And besides, you can have a look at the PowerPoint presentation when you're on a train, when you're on a plane, when you're in the office, while when it comes to video pitches, normally they require much more effort to actually review.
Yeah.
So do try and be considerate.
And then with the, I guess throwing it over slightly to a new topic, which is about, I guess, ChatGPT and the investment industry. It's not a new topic; it's been around for ages. But there's obviously individuals out there now adopting it to kind of streamline their processes of saying no to individuals. And I think there's a couple firms at the moment who have now broken some sort of record for responding to an applicant to say no, which is around a minute. So they managed to kind of put it in there. It scans it really, really quickly, and they kind of say no. But what's your view on kind of using ChatGPT in your industry to analyze pitch decks? You think it's worth it, or not really, or is that something that you may also consider implementing at a later date to streamline the process?
Look, that's actually a very interesting question, because our fund, and I know quite a few other funds, have actually experimented with AI and tools, not specifically ChatGPT, but like ChatGPT, to try and streamline their processes. Problem is, in order to have ChatGPT or related tools to completely replace the work of human labor, you would need to continuously update those models. You would need to continuously feed into new data. You need to constantly, review the results, and to potentially, change some conclusions or weights around each point that the ChatGPT would consider when saying yes or no to a pitch deck. And from my own experience, I would not say that funds in general have been very successful to date when it comes to using those tools. But you could automate certain functions much better than you can automate others, right? Like, for example, it's much easier to automate reporting, or accounting, or learning about the financial projections of those companies than when you're reviewing pitch decks sent by early stage entrepreneurs. What is the key problem? Well, one key problem is that a lot of those pitch decks, they talk about the vision, they talk about the future, the forecast, not the actual current results, right? So it's quite difficult for the robot to properly analyze it. And even when they do analyze it, it's normally, the analysis of the language, right? So how it is phrased rather than what is the actual essence of it. So when the human reviews it, he is considering more from the perspective of, his own gut feeling, or the other portfolio companies that he has seen being successful, and the robot just cannot do it effectively, right? So I would say that potentially in the future it will become more widespread, but right now, at least from my own experience, the majority of the funds who are using AI or ChatGPT like tools to, automate their processes, is just a gimmick for them. It is an opportunity for them to fundraise more from their LPs, or, they're testing it out to see how effective it could be in the future, given the right set of circumstances. But so far, it has not proven itself yet.
So on that note, how much of a gut feeling do you need to have on investing? Like when you find a company and you think, you know what, this is such a crazy idea. The financials look stable, but I have a gut feeling they'll be successful. How much does that play a role in your investment decision, or everyone's investment decision? You think? Is it a
Well,
big thing or not so much?
if if the financials look stable, then for example, for an early stage company, it's not a bad thing, right? Because you would not want, for example, the costs to overrun massively, right? But if the founders have an understanding, for example, that given the right investment, they would be able to put the money to good use, then obviously it would augment the gut feeling. But I would say that the gut feeling is much more important at the early stages of investment. So once again, before the startup has actually had an opportunity to prove themselves onto the market. So before meaningful sales are made, before there are a significant stable of potential investors who already, pitched their money into the pot. Because before that, it's normally the managing partner of the fund thinking back to his previous successes and failures in the investment world and thinking, how much better or worse would this company perform, if they ended up in the same situation based on relatively subjective set of criteria. Like once again, how well is their founding team worked together, how developed is their product based on what's already on the market in relation to competitors. And sometimes, because those information is not in the public domain, it is very difficult to obtain it, um, just by reading the reports, or just by reading news, or looking at video pitches and things like that. So it's much more about the gut feeling. But at later stages, it's gut feeling plus the financials. So I would not say that gut feeling ever stops being important, but it is just complemented by additional means of potentially negating or minimizing the red flags that could be.
What about the story? Because when we watch like Dragon's Den or Shark Tank, they sometimes they have this really really sad story, and they say, "Oh, I don't know a house fire and I lost everything, and that's why I created this amazing fire extinguisher, so no one else goes through the same problem." How important and how relevant is to have that type of passionate story to when you're building a company? Like, does that actually play a role? And do investors look at it? You know what? I believe in this person. They might not tick every box in terms of experience, but I believe in their story. I believe in their passion to build this, and they will learn quickly. Or that really doesn't play a role at all.
Well, Ricardo, not to disappoint you, but Dragon's Den is reality TV,
Yeah, of course.
obviously very staged. And,
Yeah.
they do pick the entrepreneurs who sometimes spin out the craziest stories.
Mhm.
But to answer your question, I would definitely say that, having the right story is important. How initially you came up with this idea? Have you felt the pains felt by your client, by yourself? How are you planning to scale it into the future? Once again, what kind of support do you need from your partners or investors? And how are you planning to make it into an international success?
Mhm.
But once again, the story, just like the pitch deck, they need to change slightly with each potential counterparty whom you're dealing with, right? Because when you're, for example, fundraising from a family office, they are interested in a different story than when you're fundraising from a corporation, right? Because they have different appetites to risk. They have, different objectives when it comes to the integration of technology, or the financial returns, and as a result, you would need to be showcasing different things or putting weight on different pain points when you're spinning the story. So don't just have a single jack of all trades story and
Mhm.
uh, be convinced that it works every time.
So the only
Understand.
Unfortunately, no, unfortunately, it's still a work in progress, even for the seasoned entrepreneurs
Mhm.
who do manage, to make the right additions or apply the right changes, given the right feedback. So I would say that for you as an entrepreneur, don't get discouraged if you get, shot down by potential investors in the many of the first pitches that you make, but do try and build relations with those investors, because even if they would not want to invest in you now, maybe they would in the future. And also, if they do believe in your story, if they do like you as a person, then they're much more likely to give you candid feedback, which you can use later to actually improve on your deck and once again spin your vision much more convincingly.
Interesting. So I guess the next question and the follow up for that is, how do you actually approach investors? Because there's a multitude of platforms out there. There's always the cold calling, the emails, and everything. What do you think works best? And also, what type of message works best? Because I think sending a very very long email might not be for everyone. So what do you actually think works best from your
Well,
experience?
sure. So I think that first of all, cold mailing
Hmm.
seldom works. Got to disappoint you because, like for example, for us, talking from my own experiences, I get maybe 100 or 150 cold emails from entrepreneurs every week. And unfortunately, given the fact that a lot of the deals that we consider come either from my own network or the network of my partners or from the work done by our investment team who are maybe passing through public startup databases or looking at conference winners or looking at the media, the majority of the cold emails, they just don't get as much attention. So, I mean, if you see no other option, then do try it, but don't be disappointed. And if your email just doesn't even get opened yet, right? And but I think that when it comes to cold mailing, another thing which is also very important is that if you do decide to cold mail, still research the potential investor in detail as to, for example, what has been his investment track record. Has he had any prior successes in the field, which is similar to what your company is doing? What kind of investment philosophy he has? What kind of smart money he can potentially provide to your company in particular, rather than just, you uh, having a biotech company and then cold emailing a fintech investor just because he has the money, right? Which what some
Doesn't work.
people do. So that doesn't work at all.
Hmm.
I would say that obviously the most labor intensive but also the most effective way is to do it through warm introductions, right?
Hmm.
So maybe you worked at a big corporation before you've decided to launch your own company. Maybe you've had an opportunity to engage with top decision makers at the company who might be interested in backing you as an angel investor, or maybe you attend a pitch day event at one of the major acceleration programs or at some kind of startup fail nights or something, and then sometimes angel investors or VC funds or scouts can come along and listen to your pitch and maybe potentially pass it on to somebody else. So I think that when it comes to the big ecosystems, like for example London or Silicon Valley or Singapore or a few others, the entrepreneurs there, they do have a big advantage when it comes to the multitude of events or other options which the entrepreneurs can get access to refine their pitch decks, to uh, give them access to many different kinds of investors, to understand better how to spin the story, and basically become much better at fundraising and business development as a process.
Interesting, because I think that's something we all startups kind of struggle is how to build those networks. So then the follow up question to that is how do you get started in the process of building a network? I mean, what's the best way to go about this? You mentioned going to events. You mentioned cold emails are not that responsive, but if you're brand new to the industry, you don't have any connections. Let's say you're just a student out of uni. How do you even get started? Because it is a very scary process, isn't it? First to find the right individuals, but then to actually engage in the conversation. So, what are like the tips and tricks you would give to someone just fresh out of uni?
Well, sure, Ricardo. So, look, I mean, there are universities and there are universities, right? I mean, like in the UK, for example, you have Oxbridge, you have Imperial and UCL, which have their own programs for the support of student entrepreneurship. And that support is normally given out through grants or through university accelerators, or occasionally some professors might even want to step in as angel investors. Unfortunately, in the UK, this is not as commonplace as it is in the United States,
Hmm.
where there are just there is more money available, where those programs have operated for much longer, and as a result, they have greater access to commercial partnerships, to international networks, which they can provide their alumni and existing students who are entrepreneurs. So definitely, do research what your university can provide for you if you're just a student, if you're still a student. Um, I would say that it's also quite important, especially if you have not been an entrepreneur before, to understand, your own strengths and limitations. So, for example, if you are a great tech guy, you have built, or you're planning to build a very innovative product, but you don't really know how to commercialize it, how to fundraise for it, how to do, effective pitch decks, or once again, how to showcase a vision which you believe would be, the winning vision, then sometimes and often case it is very, very important to bring the right co-founders along who might be stepping in as a CEO or, as a CFO at later stages, and, wear the hats which you cannot wear as effectively. And sometimes it is also an opportunity to go through an acceleration program, perhaps, where um, the beginner entrepreneurs would be able to better understand, once again, how to fundraise, how to do business development, how to, build effective teams, and basically get better at the very early stage beginner processes, like even, where best to legally locate your company, how to write proper term sheets when you're negotiating with with investors, and similar aspects of doing business, which, it's better to learn uh, from the accelerator program than to feel it on your own skin when things have already went wrong. But actually, there are a multitude of options available. Like, once again, support given by universities, accelerator programs, maybe even incubators or venture studios who are much more labor intensive, in that, they're much more willing to give you greater money even at an early stage, and give you access to resources which are often case, R&D or engineers or, salespeople or product development support. But at the same time, they're taking a much greater chunk of equity than a traditional angel investor or accelerator program would. So in essence, the venture studios, they are acting as co-founders of early stage entrepreneurs rather than just consultants from the outside.
Just another question, Harry. Jump in anytime you want. But I was wondering about advisors, because I know that advisors are very, very important. Um, how do you find those advisors? Because I imagine someone who has some weight in any industry will have tons of invitations. So how do you make sure you get those advisors in the first place? And also, how important are advisors for an early stage startup?
Well, look, I would say that advisors are definitely much more important for later stage companies, because um, by that stage, the startup would have already validated their product. They would have already found success on the local market, and then they're thinking about, where to expand to next internationally. And then you would potentially, bring on as advisors guys who have done it before in a different country, who knows the ins and outs of, approaching local investors, of, the business culture in those regions and things like that. While at the earlier stages, the advisors that you would aim to bring, they are not to do with, the international traction or commercial applications, but rather, in terms of product validation, or maybe access to the first angel investors and similar aspects. So it's definitely very important to pick the right advisor for your stage.
Hmm.
And it's also quite important to bring as advisors the people who don't just sit on your advisory board, but who are actually very willing and able to meaningfully contribute, right? So, for example, when it comes to a pitch deck, you would be talking about your team, and then you could also be potentially talking about your advisors if you have stellar advisors. And in that slide, it's also quite important to show that the advisors, they're not just sitting on the board, they are actually doing something, right? So they have been, a CEO of a large startup in your industry before. They know how it's done. They've made their own share of successes and failures, and now they're here to basically help you avoid the mistakes by doing so and so, by giving you better access to commercial partnerships or product development or things like that, rather than just saying that they're advisor and that's it. So do showcase how exactly they're engaging. And to answer your first question as to how to find those advisors, well, once again, there are many options. Like if you're going through an accelerator program, likelihood is the managers or the mentors could be very interested to participate as your advisors, or the VCs who might not be as interested to invest in your company right now, but would believe in your vision, and would still think that down the road it could be a potentially interesting investment opportunity for them. They might be interested to advise you now to make sure that there is a great likelihood that you would reach a stage eventually, or once again approach your colleagues who have done it before, or do cold mails if nothing else works. There
Yeah,
are many
exactly.
ways. Yeah.
I'll say there's a good example out there. I know Alexander's favourite, which is Cambridge Judge Business School. I think 2 months ago, they released their own advisor program. So they're kind of innovating again in the UK ecosystem. And what they've done is, because they've been so successful with a lot of their spin outs, especially in deep tech, AI, and again moving down that approach, they've pretty much worked with all of the big businesses situated around Cambridge and their local ecosystems, and essentially brought them all together into one platform where the students who come through their programs actually have the opportunity to talk with the board of directors, the main CEOs and stuff, who would actually sit there and discuss with them maybe 1 or 2 hours a month. That's quite a good initiative that they've put in place, but it's worth checking out that if anybody's interested in exploring the ecosystem a bit more, because there was quite a lengthy article that was published 2.5 months ago. So it's a new thing, but it is very, very relevant to the UK ecosystem, because I think 2 points Alexander mentioned is, one, what they found with an independent report lately is any academic business that spins out of university often has one of the highest fail rates, because it's very difficult for them to move towards commercialization. And again, as part of my role where I work, it's always been pointed out, how do you find ways in which you can get very tech orientated individuals to actually talk with individuals from business schools who do their masters in commercialization or business planning. I guess the question for you, Alexander, would be, how do you see, let's say universities or accelerators combining in some sense, one who's got a lot of tech and orientation and PhD students combined with someone who works more predominantly with business schools, and how can you see them kind of collaborating? That would be quite an interesting one, because I think the UK is just about exploring that angle.
Well, look, I mean, once again, Harry, there are accelerators or incubators, and basically, the difference between accelerators and incubators is that incubators go at an even earlier stage, where the founder just has an idea, while at an accelerator stage, he has an idea, maybe an MVP, and then he wants to scale it. So there are accelerators and incubators who are already associated with universities, right? Like, for example, in the States, in MIT, they have an incubator called the Engine, right? And similar thing they have at Harvard, similar thing they have at MIT, or at Stanford University, at Berkeley University in California. In the UK, this practice is also present, but outside of UCL, Oxford, and Cambridge, and maybe one or two other universities, there are not as many clear-cut success stories. And even then, for accelerators and incubators, it takes a much longer time to prove themselves, right? To showcase that is the investment that they have made and the program that they have instituted is actually successful in helping the entrepreneurs to fundraise, to commercialize, to expand. Because when you're dealing with earlier stage entrepreneurship, it just takes simply longer in order for those validation results to come in. So I would say that, for example, when you're mentioning Cambridge, what they're doing right is that from one perspective, they are far away from London, where the majority of the tech activity happens, where the majority of the fundraising gets done. But on the other side, they're located in a place where there is a huge technology hub, where you have big corporations, doing the R&D or having their laboratories. You have a university, obviously, who is doing research, and then you have startups and alumni who maybe left Microsoft or left Google and want to do something out on their own. And as a result, by being located in this relatively small melting pot, they're able to get the best of both worlds, the commercial corporate world and the academic world to, set up the right team, to get an early pilot or two with the corporation and, get a headway into the research and development and the building of an MVP, which is very important because if you're looking at early stage innovation, you would find that unfortunately, for different reasons, the governments often case don't understand how to approach early stage innovation. The corporations don't understand it, and the universities don't either. So when you are in a location where there is an opportunity for entrepreneurs, corporations, universities, and local authorities to come along and pull their ideas together, it is much more likely that you would arrive at a scenario where there are more success cases.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's Harry keeps on saying you should actually look at places like Cambridge and stuff like that, precisely because of that, because of the ecosystem and how important it is. Changing a bit topic, let's look at business plans. They are often very, very long. Do you think, or from your own experience, do investors actually look at everything in the business plan, or not so much so? It's just like a reference document. What's your take on that?
Well, look, so I mean, from my own perspective, business plans, I think of the past, right? So it used to be back in the 20th century or in the early 2000s where you had an idea for a lemonade stand, you built a business plan, you went to the bank to try and get a small business loan. Right now, there are no business plans, there are pitch decks, right? And pitch decks we discussed in the beginning.
Yeah,
So if I were an entrepreneur, I would not consider doing a business plan. I would do a pitch deck, and then I would think about um, who, once again, is my counterparty on the other side of the table. So if they're an investor, what kind of thing are they interested in? Is there a client? What kind of aspects of the product or the technology should I pay the most attention to? And then, for example, when it comes to if you got an investor interested and he has started to do due diligence on you, then the likelihood is you would be asked as an entrepreneur to provide access to your data room, which would hopefully encompass a great volume of other resources, like, for example, your financial models, the testimonials of your clients, the testimonials of your previous investors, your own CV as an entrepreneur, maybe your patents that you've had. So basically, quite a lot of in detailed information, which did not go into the pitch deck, right? So at a certain time in the past, that kind of information went into the business plan, but now the business plan became rudimentary, I would say.
hmm, okay. What about the due diligence you do on the founder? What elements of it? Because the first episode we had, you were talking about someone who actually flagged up as wanted by the FBI, which I thought was absolutely super interesting and fascinating. So, what type of due diligence you normally do on the founder itself?
Well, look, so for example, as a late stage fund, we are talking to the clients, the corporate clients, for example, if the business is a B2B in its business model, we're talking to the corporate clients of the company to see, why are they using the solution, or, maybe they were using the solution until recently, but then they switched to a competitor. We would aim to understand why. Maybe, there are red flags associated with that. Um we would talk to the previous investors of that company to see, why have they originally decided to invest? Are they happy? Would they be following on? So would they be, investing at the same stage as us? Because if not, then the likelihood is there could be something wrong with the startup that the entrepreneurs are not talking about. Um, we would also be, once again, looking at the financial projections. We would be looking at the company's team to understand their ability to deliver. On the team side, it's very beneficial if the entrepreneurs have previously worked with each other before, especially in the startup world, and what has been their experience in the startup world. Did they make any meaningful exits in the similar field? What kind of lessons did they learn? Um, and similar things also in terms of due diligence. It's quite important to, for example, for us as a deep tech fund, to understand whether the patents that the company has, do they just claim to have those patents, or do they actually have them, and are they actually in a meaningful area that is important for the subsequent growth and development of that product, or are they just in a related field which is not as relevant? Also, if it's a deep tech company, it's a good thing, if the founders have a PhD, if they have a good citation index, as a H index, and quite a bunch of other things. I mean, I can talk for 2 or 3 hours about that and not finish completely.
No, thank you. That's quite interesting because I think it's always relevant for companies just to know what to prepare and what will investors look at.
Sure.
That's it for me, Harry. Do you have any questions?
I think that's most of it, really. Again, it was just around the startup journey. I think you gave a really good in detail chat in regards to the pitch decks, the business plans, kind of going over the ins and outs of how to actually get introductions from investors. I think that's the main thing that was around our side, especially from the conversations we have. It's how do I actually get these introductions? It's quite interesting to hear your view on, oh, the emails don't really work, or good luck. But again, it's one of the reasons we put the startup events together. It's about building that community, bringing people together. Yes, there are loads of people who do it, and again, it's all about collaboration, because at the end of the day, it's you never know who you meet. And again, coming into a pre-COVID world, it's the face-to-face meeting is always better than an online pitch, because then you can actually get to know the individual. You really get to build that relationship, and again, you can kind of have your gut feeling is probably a bit easier to go through rather than reading an email and saying, it's interesting. Actually having that conversation enables you to have a better understanding and see if you actually like them and if they're genuine as well. But apart from that, I really appreciate your time, Alexander. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Well, for sure, Harry, just on the last point when you're mentioning the events, I would just like once again to emphasize that when you're in London, especially, there are just so many events which you can potentially attend, and the majority of those are free. So I think, it's almost a crime not to make use of that opportunity, because over there you would not only meet other entrepreneurs, some of whom might be your co-founders. You could also meet, people who can help you validate the technology, potential investors, corporate collaborators, future clients, many other counterparties. And you would often case find that if you're going to the paid events, to the big events, that actually, minute by minute, it's not as effective or useful for you, because to the big events, everybody just goes to, maintain a good public profile and to sell themselves. So it's not as much about meaningful conversations, about the real connections, and about you actually being able to deliver your vision and to convince your counterparty in its accuracy and effectiveness, right? So do make use of the small events, of which there are hundreds going on every month, and make use of any kind of opportunity, because as an early stage entrepreneur, nobody expects that it's going to be a smooth ride and a quick one, for sure.
Oh, definitely. We'll come to the startup events.
Mm,
Yeah, I think that's it, Alexander. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an
sure.
absolute pleasure. It's been very insightful, I think, for our audience, because we have almost 2 hours of content, and there's so much for them to just note down and say, okay, I should do this, not that. It's actually quite insightful. Thank you so much.
Wonderful to chat to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was